Welcome to this town hall meeting hosted by the League of Women Voters of Appleton with support from the League of Women Voters of Winnebago County. All the state elected officials from Senate District 19 were invited, and we thank the two of them, Rachael Cabral-Guevara and Lee Snodgrass, for agreeing to participate. We hope that this is the first in a series of town hall meetings for this and other Senate districts. The League of Women Voters began as a mighty political experiment intended to help recently enfranchised women voters in learning how to register to vote and how to be an informed voter. In its 101-year history, the League of Women Voters has engaged in nonpartisan advocacy, including voter registration, education, and action, all to fulfill the mission to empower voters and defend democracy. The League has recently acknowledged their non-inclusive past and has recently elevated their diversity, equity, and inclusion mission to be equal to their nonpartisan mission. Advocacy by League standards means that the League does not support or endorse candidates or parties, but does engage in advocacy using research-based positions. The League of Women Voters of Appleton has most recently completed a 2-year study on climate change, resilience, and preparedness, and has several videos from the study committee available on our website that explain the results of the study. In addition, videos are available for all recent candidate forums for City Council in Appleton and Calumet County Judge. Thank you all for attending and submitting questions for our elected officials to discuss. Now I would like to introduce our membership director and county board supervisor from Kaukauna, Cindy Filona.
Thank you. This evening, I will be doing a land acknowledgement. And I'd like to start by saying that Appleton is located on the traditional homeland of the Menominee Nation. In addition to the Menominee Nation, there are 10 other federally recognized Native American sovereign nations in Wisconsin, as well as a brother town that is not yet recognized. Tonight, we will be honoring the Santee Dakota peoples who occupied land in western Wisconsin since time began, though they no longer call this place home. The advent of French fur traders brought many changes to this area, one of which was pushing the Dakota even further west. Their ancestral occupation is still felt today, and we are grateful for their care. By acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional land of these sovereign nations, we honor with gratitude the land itself and all of the winged, two-legged, four-legged, many-legged, and the water peoples who have stewarded the land and water throughout the generations and for generations to come. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Linda Biella, who is our Action Vice President, and she will be our moderator for this evening.
I'm pleased to introduce Representative Rachael Cabral-Guevara from the 55th Assembly District and Representative Lee Snodgrass from the 57th Assembly District. We're grateful to both of you for taking the time in your busy schedules to join us this evening. Representative Dave Murphy from the 56th Assembly District was unable to attend, and Senator Roger Roth from the 19th Senate District did not respond to our invitation. Could we have the next slide, please? We have compiled questions that have been sent to us in advance, and we thank everyone who submitted them. We hope to get as many of these questions answered as possible, but want to make sure that our legislators have ample and equal time to respond. You may also submit questions through the Q&A on the webinar or to the email address that you see on this slide if you are viewing on Facebook. As was done with the questions that we received in advance, we will screen them to avoid partisanship and delete any comments that do not conform to respectful civil discourse. The final 30 minutes will be devoted to questions submitted this evening. These questions will be posed to the legislators by League moderators as time allows. Unlike a candidate forum where responses are timed and there is no back and forth discussion, we hope that this can be a little less formal with some exchange of ideas between our two representatives. I'll take turns posing each question first to each of them. I'd like to spend about 5 minutes on each topic so that we can touch on as many as possible. Depending on the discussion, however, we may not have time to address all the questions that have been submitted. Being mindful of the League's nonpartisan policy, I would ask our representatives to focus on the topics presented and potential bipartisan solutions to these important issues. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll see the first question. And I will ask this first question of Representative Cabral-Guevara. This is the first term in the Wisconsin Assembly for both of you. What are your priorities for the current session and beyond?
So Linda, you can actually refer to me as just Rachael.
Okay.
It's simpler by Rachael. Everybody gets the Cabral-Guevara mixed up, or RCG, something simple. Okay. So the question, what are your priorities in the current session and beyond? My biggest focus really has been healthcare. This is something that I campaigned on. Affordability, access, these are important in my world as a nurse practitioner and the small businesses and folks throughout the state with high deductibles that I work with. Prior to working at my clinic and working as a nurse practitioner, I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. And so education has also been a big focus for me. I have proposed some bills through the last couple months here that I've been down in Madison, and it seems to be focused mostly, again, on healthcare and education, although I'm open to other areas also. But if I were to end my seat in 2 years and I felt rewarded that I made an impact, those would be the two areas that would make me smile and feel I made some sort of contribution to Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Snodgrass, Lee.
Yes, thank you. First names are easier and we're new, so we're used to being called by our first names. Like Rachael, you know, I campaigned on certain priorities. For me, again, it was healthcare and taking the Medicaid expansion, making sure we're covering more Wisconsinites and having more affordable access to healthcare. I'm also a big passionate supporter of public education and knew that that was something that I was going to want to work on as well. But then when you get here, you know, you get on committees that might not necessarily align with what you campaigned on. And I do have passion for the committees that I'm on. I'm on the transportation committee, so I'm very excited to be working on multimodal transportation, investment in what we can do with rail transportation, things like that. I'm also on children and families, which is an issue that's very important to me. It's a family issue. My mother worked in that field for a long time. I'm excited to be voting on some bills tomorrow that I think are going to be really important. And then also I'm on forestry, parks, and outdoor recreation. And if you follow me on Facebook, you know that just about every weekend I'm in some other state park or county park, exploring what Wisconsin has to offer. So that's exciting for me. I think also as new legislators, you know, part of being a new legislator is learning the office, you know, learning how to connect our constituents to the resources that the state has that they may not have been aware of that can provide them with some help or some support or some direction, whether that be our municipal partners or whether that be our constituents who need help with UI or other issues. So, you know, a lot of it is learning the job, you know, building the plane as you fly it. But like Rachael, I have some bills that I'm also working on. Some of those are environmental related. Some of those are actually related to things that my constituents have asked for. So I'm excited to continue to move forward with those things.
Lee, I'm super excited that you're going to like a new state park every single week. You need to text me the best ones for sure, because I'm always looking to explore our state. So keep
Absolutely.
me
think
on the text message list, please.
I feel like we can build our bipartisanship by, you know, having Rachael and Lee at some sort of park. So we'll have to do that.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. Okay, next slide, please. With the delay in the census data, how do you see the redistricting process playing out in the coming months? Will you consider supporting nonpartisan maps submitted by the People's Maps Commission? And would you support legislation to create a permanent nonpartisan redistricting process similar to the Iowa model? And Lee, we'll start with you this time.
Well, I mean, we're all disappointed, right, that the census data is delayed. You know, first it was going to be April, and I think now it's August, but more likely going to be the fall. So the reality is that does put back the timeline for being able to draw fair maps. I'm grateful that the People's Maps Commission got a head start, got an early start. And one of the things that I always like to point out to people about what that Maps Commission is it is truly nonpartisan. One of the Appleton's gentlemen who was selected to be on there, a local doctor, is a very out Republican, and it's an issue that's very important to him, securing those fair maps. So yes, I would be open to considering what they submit. I do believe in the work that they're doing, and I do believe that they're doing their very best to make sure that that work is nonpartisan. I do think that we have an opportunity. A lot of times people also worry about, they talk about the constitutionality of somebody else drawing the maps. They forget the part that the legislature still does have to vote on those maps. We are the ones who still decide whether those maps are approved or not approved. So it still does go through that constitutional process. I have to be honest, there's no surprise, and Rachel, I'm sure, would say the same thing. There's quite a bit of division. So it is possible that we may not have agreement between both houses in the legislature and the governor, and these maps could end up in the courts. Hope springs eternal that, we all stand to benefit from fair maps that make sense. So I'm going to stay hopeful for now, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
I think Lee had a pretty good response overall. I'd like to be hopeful that we can have fair maps overall. From my understanding, being new to this here, the People's Map Commission was actually put together by the governor, if I'm correct. And so, when we talk bipartisan, I really hope that it is a bipartisan effort on that behalf. I'm not as familiar with the Iowa model that you speak of here. I have to admit, I did not research that at all. When I think about the overall idea of the redistricting and the delay that will come with that, I know that there are state and there are federal statutes that I would follow. I'm hoping that will be followed on both sides here. I know that this has been a hot topic, and I have faith in our system and the vote that will come out of it that Lee spoke of. And so in the end, I'm not sure everybody's going to be happy on either side, but I believe in the system that we've developed at this point on a state and a federal level, and we'll follow that.
Okay.
And I think, a unique thing about fair maps and redistricting is, I'm in a district that tends to skew more Democratic. And so it's considered, quote unquote, an easier district. Rachel's in a district that might tend to skew more Republican and might be easier for her. I have confidence, I'm not going to speak for her, but I have confidence that both of us don't have problems knocking on all the doors and meeting all of its constituents and asking for those votes one by one. That's how elections are won. So no matter how the maps are drawn, and it's even possible that Rachel and I could be drawn into the same district, or others around us could be drawn into the same district. So I believe, and I'm pretty sure that Rachel would agree, that we don't have a problem working for the votes. So we don't need an unfair advantage either way.
Yeah. And there's something to be said for that. A map can be written as it is, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into it too. It's just not a line on a map that will designate what the outcome of that election is. It's going out and knocking on doors and meeting people and engaging in the community and being part of that community. There's a lot to be said for that. It's just not a map with lines. So people know that, constituents know that. And in the end, I think that that's what it will be narrowed down to.
But it's got to be bipartisan.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? What is your opinion about proposed voting legislation, such as increasing voter identification and absentee voting requirements and limiting early voting? And Rachel, we'll start with you this time.
Gotcha. So there's been a lot of discussion about this, particularly with the election that just occurred, and now with spring coming up here. There's a lot of different bills out right now that are circulating. I'm just going to go through some of them and then tell you my stance on them. I did jot a few of them down here, so just because there are quite a few. We have Senate Bill 203. And this bill provides a thorough explanation as to who is able to return an absentee ballot on behalf of another person at the municipal clerk. This expands the ballot mailing deliver possibilities. I obviously support that one. Senate Bill 204, this bill standardizes the absentee ballot application process. So this one provides a little bit more clarification to what we already have in play. Under current law, the written application is required for a person to receive an absentee ballot, but does not specify what the application should entail. This bill will clarify that a little bit more. This bill also gets rid of automatic delivery of the absentee ballots of certain groups, though they can still request absentee ballot through the regular process. This bill also gets rid of the voter ID exemption for 3 of the 7 groups currently exempted. However, still maintains exemptions for the active duty military, victims of domestic violence and abuse, sexual abuse and assault, residents in a residential care facility who choose to provide eligibility in other ways, and somebody who has had their license recently revoked. I would support that also. Senate Bill 205, this provides penalties for people who try to influence the voting decisions of residents in healthcare facilities. I support that also. Senate Bill 206, this bill standardizes the process of voters claiming to be indefinitely confined. I know that this was something that was definitely a hot discussion with the last election. So clarifying what is that indefinitely confined and when and how that can be utilized. Senate Bill 207, this bill bars officials from receiving money from non-governmental organizations for the purpose of election administration. I do support that one. Senate Bill 209, this bill provides and authorizes the use of drop boxes for the purpose of returning an absentee ballot and clarifies that it must be secure, water resistant, tamper resistant, and all ballots must be collected by 9 a.m. I support that one also. Senate Bill 210, this bill actually expands access for poll observers. And by doing this, both parties of observers will be able to better perform their duties. Senate Bill 211 clarifies that absentee ballot envelopes should be district from the applications themselves. It also requires a standard application process. And then Senate Bill 212, this bill simply expands penalties for municipal employees who are provided any sort of offenses or causing any sort of voter fraud. All these are out there. There are versions of this already, but this is just a further clarification. So I kind of picked them all apart here just because I know there's been a lot of discussion on what these bills actually are going to do and what the follow through will be if there are people that are accused of voter fraud. So what is my opinion on all these that are out there? I'm looking forward to better outcomes or more clarification for clerks and for districts and to overall increase the voter confidence.
Thank you. Lee, what are your opinions about these?
So I respectfully disagree with Rachel on all of these. We've seen, that's no secret. You open up any newspaper, any online site, and there's discussions about essentially a spate of bills, almost always introduced by Republicans, which are really essentially voter suppression bills. They make it harder to vote because there are more hurdles there. I'm not going to go bill by bill like she did, but what I would say is that I believe in democracy. I believe in free and fair elections. And in this past election, we've had many, many audits, investigation, et cetera, across the country and even in Wisconsin, because people claimed there was election tampering or some sort of election fraud, and there simply wasn't. I have talked to the clerks in my district, Outagamie County, Appleton, Menasha, about their process, about the work that they've done. They all take it incredibly seriously. They take an oath. The people that they have as volunteers take an oath. These bills are addressing problems that don't exist. I even went on the Heritage Foundation website, a conservative website. They have a voter fraud database where you can do a search. There was one incident of voter fraud in the 2020 election. There was one in 2018. There were 2 in 2016 in Wisconsin. This is not a problem that exists. And these are bills that will just simply make it harder for people to vote. You know, if you are in an assisted living facility, it should not be a crime for the person in there to say, remember, there's an election coming up. Don't forget to request your absentee ballot. But that would become illegal if any of these bills passed. I think we should make it as easy as possible for people to vote, and not everybody has a 9-to-5 job. So I think it's great to have voting hours available on Saturday. I think that early voting is excellent for people who have shift work or who have difficulty planning, or maybe they're a single parent with several kids to juggle. And I think that the easier we make it for people to vote, the more voices are heard. And I believe that the more voices are heard, the more robust our democracy is. And so I will continue to fight for bills that expand voting rights instead of restrict them.
Thank you very much.
Can I comment on that?
Go ahead.
So when you say voices to be heard, I've heard a lot of voices from my constituents, and I feel it's very important that I need to do whatever I need to do to make sure that my constituents and the people that are supporting of me feel confident in this entire process. And that has been a big concern. I know it hasn't necessarily been agreed upon from the Democratic side, but if I have a large group of people that are skeptical and concerned, I think that needs to be addressed. And so I will continue to speak for those folks and continue to support these bills. So thank you.
And I would say that those people can just be pointed to the evidence, and you can assure them that even a conservative group like the Heritage Foundation has not found overwhelming incidents of voter fraud. And I'm sure you know and have talked to the clerks too. I mean, they take their job seriously, and it's offensive to them. And it would be great to say to them, hey, I've talked to Cammie, or I've talked to, I think his name is Brian, and this is how the process works, and this is what they've assured me of. And people trust us, so we can talk to them about our firsthand knowledge.
Yep, and I agree. I'm not saying that any particular individual or clerk did a poor job, but if a constituent has a question of an official that has been elected, they should be able to get the answers that or ask the questions that they need to have confidence in those individuals. And that's all that I've asked. We're not going to go into all of the different cases and situations that have popped up that have brought concern here. But I feel as an elected official, if you are the clerk or a mayor or anybody that has to do anything with a election, if a constituent is asking a question, it should be required that a conversation take place. So
I'm not arguing with that.
Okay, I think we should go on to the next question so we can get through a few more. What legislation has been introduced to address the response to the COVID pandemic and the economic recovery? And what is your position on this legislation? And Lee, I'll start with you this time.
Well, as you know, there was a large bill that was introduced at the beginning of this session. It was one of the first ones that we talked about. And then it went to the Senate, the Senate made several amendments that made it a bill that, frankly, as a Democrat, I could support. The Assembly bill had provisions in it that I felt, using the term poison pills, I felt that they were needlessly divisive. There were certainly things that we could agree on, UI relief. We could agree on some of the eviction moratorium extensions. We could agree on some of the small business relief that was in there, some of the economic aspects of the bill. And then there was other aspects that the Assembly had added in that sort of just made it things we knew we were going to fight on, and we knew the governor wouldn't support. So when it went to the Senate, and the Senate is obviously Republican majority as well, and they were able to make amendments to that, taking out some of those provisions and get agreement with the governor, I was really hopeful that that bill, that clean bill, would come back to the Assembly and we would all be able to pass that on a bipartisan basis. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And as what we've seen now, some of those provisions that had been stripped out have been introduced as standalone legislation. They passed, the governor vetoed them. So that's where we are. So my position is, I wish that my colleagues and Rachel's colleagues could work together to find some sort of common ground and to really realize that although we think we see the light at the end of the tunnel, there are still a lot of people who are feeling the impacts, the economic impacts, the health impacts, the mental health impacts, you know, the many, many, many challenges that COVID-19 brought to our communities, our business community, our schools, our families. I wish we could keep that at the foreground first and foremost, and really just sort of have a clean bill that addresses those specific needs, rather than this fighting about ideology about whether we agree about what can be closed or who needs to wear a mask or any of those things. I really feel like if we just kept the people who are really suffering first and foremost, we could get a lot more done. But as Rachel will probably tell you, that's been incredibly challenging.
Okay. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
So when you ask for what legislation has been introduced, I again have a little list here that I'm going to go through just to clarify. We have Assembly Bill 1, also known as the COVID relief package. That's the one that Lee had mentioned. I am in support of that. The amendments were made to it. It in the end didn't necessarily go through. Many of the amendments that were in that COVID bill have been pulled out and have been proposed as independent bills, and I am supportive of those. Assembly Bill number 4, which has to do with the pharmacy techs and students administering vaccines. This came to the health committee that I'm on. I am supportive of that. It allows for more individuals to be able to administer the vaccine after they've had some continuing education hours for that. Senate Bill 183, which would allow Wisconsin to join several states, including New York, Colorado, to give legislative oversight on the funds that are received from the government. This is also known as Truth in the Spending Act. I am supportive of that. Something similar to this was proposed in 2009 with the Democratic legislative body, and that was taken up in a bipartisan effort. So I do support that. And then we have Assembly Bill 148. This also, if I'm correct, went through the Health Committee. This allows certain healthcare providers licensed in other states to practice in Wisconsin during COVID-19. This allows quicker access and quicker nursing staff, therapy staff, and so forth to help in our state. So I did have the opportunity to vote on that in Health Committee also. So my stance on it has been any bill pretty much that has come out that pertains to COVID, I have been in support of.
Okay, thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Many citizens are concerned about the lack of bipartisanship in the legislature. Can you give examples of bills that have passed or are being contemplated that do show bipartisan cooperation? And in what areas can the legislature work constructively with Governor Evers? Rachel, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I would like to say that one example that Lee and I here have discussed a little bit prior to going live here was our bipartisan approach at the listening session. That I think is one bit to display civility within politics. That makes me hopeful, right? I do have another list of bills that would give some examples of bipartisanship. Assembly Bill 34, which protects people with pre-existing conditions in the state of Wisconsin, regardless of what happens on the federal level in the Affordable Care Act. This was voted on and we had bipartisan support for that. Assembly Bill 121, and this was authored by Representative Stubbs. She's out of Madison. There was large support for this bill. This focuses on hair braiding without a license here in the state of Wisconsin, which will help with job opportunities in many communities. And then I personally authored a bill. It's called Assembly Bill 128. And this is a bipartisan bill regarding pelvic exams for women and requiring consent. This is going to be in committee, I'm hoping in the next few weeks here, but the response that I've had as I put it out has been encouraging. So these are just a few that are out there. Another big one that we see in regards to funds coming into our state that has bipartisan support is the broadband support, right? Expansion of broadband within this state. And I am hopeful and positive that our outcomes will be at a level that we can both agree on. I know today we were talking about our hopes within the Republican Party of supplying broadband to 97% of Wisconsin. And so that's something that I look forward to, and hopefully we can work together to achieve those funds to reach that incredible number.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Lee, how about your opinions?
Well, I share the concern of the citizens about bipartisanship in the legislature. I'm gonna do some truth talk here. So a lot of the bills that come through, they're called co-sponsorship memos. They come through. Oftentimes we'll have Republican and Democratic senators on them, but then only Republican legislators on them. And it will be a bill that sometimes a Democrat may have led on last time or done research on or been known to have been a leader on that bill and are suddenly left off. So I think we first have to start with playing nice within our body and acknowledging that, you know what, Democrats have good ideas. And just because Republicans are in the majority doesn't mean that it's a bad bill if they include their Democratic colleagues on it, especially if they've worked on those bills. We also know that the governor is highly unlikely to sign a bill that doesn't have bipartisan support. If you know, a bill comes and it has Democrats and Republicans on it, it's a more appealing bill to him. So it's a motivation to try and work together. And I know that if I want a bill to even get through, even get at committee, a hearing in committee, that I need to reach out to Republican counterparts. I have an adoption bill right now that finally got a bill number. And Ron Tussler and Roger Roth are on it with me. Now, I think you guys know we're not the best of buddies, but we can work together on this bill. And this is something that I was happy to put forward and to have their support on. So I'm hoping with them on it that it might actually see the light of day. Rachel's right, though. There's a lot that passes with bipartisan support. Not all Democratic ideas are bad. Not all Republican ideas are bad. And sometimes I think we get stuck in whose idea was it first, rather than sort of thinking of the end game of like, how are we going to make a positive impact for somebody? You know, in the end, Rachel doesn't need credit. I don't need credit. We just both want to know that a good idea went forward and helped somebody. And so there are definitely bills like that. She mentioned the pharmacy tech bill. And there was a pharmacy benefit managers bill that also went through that, you know, helps reduce prescription drug costs. We can all agree on that. We can all agree that we want to get vaccines in arms as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. And if making it so that, you know, pharmacy tech workers can be those who helped administer those vaccines, great. We all know that we want to have affordable drug costs and more people being able to afford the medicine that they need. And if a bill is going to help do that, great, we can agree on that. So at the end of the day, there are things that we can agree on. I think, unfortunately, we kind of get hung up on the credit or, you know, who's going to be first or second or third on something, things that, frankly, our constituents don't know about and don't care about. They just want us to get to work and to get things done.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide, please. By expanding Badger Care, Wisconsin will save about $630 million over the course of the 2-year budget and help 91,000 people gain coverage or reduce premiums. Do you support the expansion of Badger Care? Lee, we'll start with you.
Shocker, I do. It's something I campaigned on. It's something that just makes fiscal sense. And we've seen recently, there was an article in the Journal Sentinel when it comes to the American Rescue Act, that number is actually 1.6. We have an opportunity to have money that other states have taken, other states that have been led by conservative governors or conservative legislatures have taken to be able to cover more Wisconsinites up to 138% of the poverty line to provide access to more healthcare. And if ever there was a time to do it, it's in the middle of a health pandemic. I have story after story after story of people who would greatly benefit from the expansion of Badger Care or Medicaid, as it's called nationally. I can also tell you that I support a public option. You know, I'm going to tell you a story about today. I had insurance before, a high deductible HSA at the place where I was before. I had to order new contacts today. The last time I ordered the new contacts, it cost me $150 out of pocket. Today I ordered it with my state insurance and they said that'll be $38. I believe that others should be able to buy into a public option, a public insurance plan. It makes everybody's lives easier. And frankly, nobody should have to choose between financial security, going into debt, or their healthcare. I have made those decisions in the past. I know others who've made those decisions, and healthcare is a human right.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, so overall, I do not support the expansion of Medicaid, or Badger Care. I have a really hard time supporting a program that might increase dependency. I know that through my clinic, as well as other clinics in the state of Wisconsin, there are other options out there too when it comes to affordability. I think that it's a bigger picture that needs to be addressed when it comes to cost and cost visibility, transparency within the world of healthcare. I know there are other options out there that many of my patients, as well as small business owners and residents here in the state of Wisconsin, are utilizing, such as Medishare programs. I know that they have looked at the market themselves and have found other options. They have looked at higher deductibles, which then will be supplemented with facilities such as mine, or a cost-effective healthcare that has just the same, if not better, outcomes as some of the more expensive options. So overall, I do not support the expansion of Badger Care at this time.
Okay, should we go to the next slide? Next question. What changes would you like to see in the school funding in the coming biennium? And do you support private school vouchers and the expansion of publicly funded charter schools? Rachel, let's start with you, please.
So second part of this, do you support the private school vouchers and expansion? I do, very much so. This is my tax money. And if I would like my tax money to go to a private voucher, a private school, or a charter school, I feel that that is my right. What changes would I like to see regarding funding? When it comes to funding overall, I think I've been pretty outspoken during my campaigning and my election that I feel any money needs to go to the classroom and to the students as a whole. I feel a lot of money goes to administrative costs, and that can overshadow the smaller classroom sizes and the support that students need. Teaching at the university, I know that the funding is great and can at times not, in my opinion, be put in the right spot. For my students, I saw better outcomes when the class sizes were smaller, when money was put directly into them rather than the administrative portions or new fancy buildings that are shiny on the outside, but what about the content on the inside? Another area that I think I would definitely support is funding for continuing ed with the instructors, with the teachers. This also will bring better outcomes for your students. I saw it directly at the university where I worked. So change or so for your first part of your question here, I would like money to be reassessed and put into those students as a whole, not administrative costs. And then, yes, I do support the private school vouchers.
Lee?
Well, I feel very strongly, I'll go in the same order that Rachel did. I do not support the private school vouchers, which is an expansion of publicly funded charter schools. I believe that my public tax dollars should be supporting truly public schools. People like to use the word school choice, and you do have a choice. You have a choice if you send your child to Xavier or Fox Valley Lutheran or any of our private schools. And you do that as a family, you make that decision, you save the money, and that is your choice. I do not believe that the tax dollars that I pay should be going to fund two different school systems, which is what is happening now in Wisconsin. And those are school systems that do not have a publicly elected accountable school board. So, you know, if I don't like what's happening in the Appleton area school districts, and that's where my tax dollars go, I take a look at who's on the school board and the decisions that they're making and vote them out if I don't like the decisions that they are making. But that money that is going to some of those privately held schools, there's no recourse if I don't like how they're doing, if their student performance or what their curriculum is, et cetera. So I am very against that. And I would like to see transparency on our property tax bills so that you know exactly what portion of your tax dollars are going to fund a school that has no accountability to essentially the public body. In terms of the school's budget, I am a big supporter of what Governor Evers put into the school funding for the coming biennium. I think he put in just over 600 million in general aid to the school districts, restoring that 2/3 funding model, which is something that we did at one time. And we're going to have to increase our special education funding. We know that we've had quite a lack of funding and resources in special education. And there are people who will say, well, my kid doesn't have special needs, and this is not a concern of mine, but all students benefit because we are legally bound to make sure that those children have an education and they have their needs met. Any school will take resources to make sure that that's done. And those resources come away from the general population. So if we can properly fund special education, all students will be better off and all students will do better. I also think we see a real disparity in school funding when it comes to rural school districts. And I support what's in the governor's budget there to take some of that revenue limit equity for low spending school districts and increase that ceiling so that they can do better and they can have greater resources. I'm a big fan of public education. I think it's the smartest investment. It pays off in the long run. We have students who become, these are the students who are going to be the ones fixing our cars and taking our legal cases and taking our temperature and building our roads, et cetera. So investing in these students and the educational foundation that they have now pays off and benefits us all later.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. What do you see as the most urgent infrastructure needs in our state, and how should these projects be funded? Lee, let's start with you.
So when I read this, I was thinking when you said infrastructure, you're probably talking about roads, but I'm going to talk about broadband a little bit. And I think that is probably the biggest point of agreement that we're going to have from a Republican and Democrat side. And I think we've seen that broadband and internet access is becoming, in essence, a necessary utility, like water, like electricity. And we saw that in the pandemic, right? We saw that even more in the pandemic as people, suddenly needed to upgrade their services, or we had families who, again, in a school funding model, schools were providing hotspots and schools were providing equipment. But we still have parts of the state where they simply do not have the ability to run their business, be in school because they do not have proper access to high-speed internet or even medium-speed internet. So I think when we look at infrastructure, we need to include broadband as a part of that. I'm happy that the governor declared this the year of broadband. I'm happy to hear, as Rachael mentioned, that the Republicans might be talking about this as a priority for them too. I think this is another thing where we can say, look, nobody needs credit for it. Let's just get it done for the people in Wisconsin. In terms of traditional infrastructure, roads, as we talk about it, when I ran in 2018, that's all we were talking about. It was just fix it. All the roads were falling apart and all the roads were crumbling. They're a little better, but I think we need to do better. I like what the governor has in his budget about allocations for county roads, for local municipalities to make some of that investment themselves. And I think we need to look at complete streets. I'm a person who bikes a lot. I'm a person who's a big believer in public transportation. I'd like to get to a point, where my daughter lives in Minnesota. She doesn't own a car. She doesn't want to own a car. And when we look at building new roads and expanding roads, I think we need to look at how can we make these roads that we can take not just cars on, but buses on and bikes on. And what does that look like? And that's really important to me, that the connectivity of the Fox cities, the greenways of Fox cities is really important to me. So being on the transportation committee, that's an exciting thing for me. How are we going to pay for it? One of the things that I think we can do is we can go back to indexing the gas tax to inflation. It was a bipartisan agreement before. It worked. It's not going to provide all the money, but it's going to provide some of the money. And I think you'll talk about it a little bit later in the governor's budget. There's another potential revenue source if we're able to legalize marijuana. And I think that would be a great place to invest some of that additional money coming into the state, into our infrastructure and into our roads.
Okay, Rachel, what are your thoughts?
I'm gonna show bipartisanship here, and I'm gonna concur with Lee on just about everything she said there. I'm not gonna disagree. Lee, we're doing good, girlfriend. We're doing good. One thing that I have heard, though, from some of the constituents in my area, they talk a lot about the expansion from Appleton on 41 up to Green Bay, looking to expand the lanes. So that would be one project, maybe specific to part of my district and Dave Murphy's district there. Lee, you're not on there, are you? You're on 41?
It wouldn't necessarily include a large part of my district, but as a transportation committee member, it's going to be something that we're obviously talking about.
Yeah. And when it comes to funding, you know, even during my primary, during the election, you know, this is one that I'm stumped on. This is one that there's discussion. I've heard from many folks. Do we do tolls? Do we increase the tax on gas? Do we increase the licensing fees? I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and they suggested increasing fees on the businesses themselves when they have larger equipment riding on these roads, since those are the ones that are destroying the roads, you know, more. There's so many ideas out there. And I'll be honest, this is not my area of expertise. I'm going to refer back to the Transportation Committee, and I'll stick in my expertise of Health Committee, Mental Health Committee, and universities and higher ed. So,
I will say that I do not support the diversion of funds from general purpose revenue to roads. You know, we already have funding sources for our roads. I think we need to keep those. I don't think we need to take any more GPR away from other things that we want to fund and put it into roads. So, you know, it's a complicated issue.
it is, you know, and from my understanding, again, this isn't an area I have dug too deep into. Every year, the funding does increase to transportation. It's not like there's cuts that are occurring every single year to this area. The question, though, is it enough addition to the transportation fund to assist with the roads? And that has been the hang up, because most people feel it has not been enough. So.
And let's not even get into the bonding issues, because that's very much involved in funding transportation.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next question, please. How should Wisconsin fund the multiple challenges posed by climate change? And do you support the concept of a national carbon fee and dividend to encourage businesses to move from fossil fuels to renewable alternatives while protecting the vast majority of consumers from the traditional costs? Rachel, we'll start with you.
Gotcha. So when we talk about climate change as a whole, you know, I've been encouraged when we talk about emissions, carbon emissions as a whole, and the decline, particularly in the United States over the last many years. There has been an effort to look at this. When it comes to renewable energies and the revenues that can be brought in by that, as well as expansion of that, I'm also hopeful that this will continue to be explored here in the United States as well as in other countries. When it comes to how should Wisconsin fund the challenges, I don't have a great answer for you on that one either. Hold on one second, I need to shut my door here. The national carbon fee, I do not support the national carbon fee. Sorry, I have too many children and they run in and out, and then when they come in, they don't shut the door all the way, hence why I had to go and shut that. Do I support the national carbon fee? I do not. I think that's what I got on this one. I don't have a lot for you on this one here. I don't have a suggestion for funding the climate change at this time, but I do know that there are a lot of efforts across this country as well as across the whole world that are looking at this, because we're all in this together. And if there is a decline, if people are starting to suffer, there needs to be a group effort to address this.
Thank you. Lee?
So I guess this is what my answer to anybody who wants things from me in Wisconsin, anybody who wants me to support issues, is I remind them that there is a finite pool of money, that is the budget, and that we decide how we're going to apportion that amount of money. So to me, how should Wisconsin fund multiple challenges proposed by climate change? It's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of saying, this is the amount of money we have, and this is what we're going to put here and there. I think we can find money in our budget for something as valuable as this. And Rachel's going to hate this, but I think we can find money by taxing businesses at a higher rate, larger businesses at a higher rate who are getting tax breaks right now that they don't need. I'm not going to name names, but there's definitely some tax loopholes that we can close. The dark store loophole, if Roger Roth was here, he and I can get into that again. There are ways that we can find money in Wisconsin by closing some loopholes for people who are not paying, or businesses who are not paying, I should say. And again, we can always legalize. That would be another funding source. I feel it's not a choice at this point. We are far past the point where we can think about, well, maybe we'll do this or maybe we'll do that. We're in it. We're in the decline here when it comes to climate change and climate crisis. Everything from how you mentioned the league's studies on emergency responsiveness to climate. We're going to continue to have adverse weather systems that are impacted by the changes we've seen due to changes in our climate, and we're going to have to provide funding for those as well. Do I support the concept of a national carbon fee and dividend? I've heard presentations on this several times. It's very intriguing to me. I know that I believe that Outagamie County was possibly going to take this up. I don't know if it was going to end up in referendum or be a vote. I'd like to see that issue be an issue that does go to advisory referendums throughout the state, so that I can see what the level of statewide support there is for that. To me, it makes sense. To me, it's something that I'd be happy to support, because frankly, if we don't take bold moves like this, we're not going to have a planet to fight on and town halls to debate on. We're gonna be trying to figure out, how to keep ourselves alive, because food's not going to grow and it's going to be too hot for us to be outside and things like that. So I think we're going to have to make really difficult decisions really fast. We're going to have to rip off that Band-Aid, and we're going to have to make investments that make real impact on reducing the impact of climate change, or it's going to be too late.
Okay, thank you. All right. What kinds of reforms to our justice system do you favor? And how can the number of incarcerated people be safely reduced? How should our juvenile justice system be reformed?
So is this my start or is this Lee's start?
Go ahead.
Okay. When it comes to the criminal justice system, or I'm just going to speak on incarceration as a whole, I think one of the biggest areas that need to be addressed is mental health as a whole. This is an area that funding has lacked in. I know that my family has directly been impacted by this, and I feel that resources need to be assessed as well as connected. This is one area that I've seen personally within my family, and the benefit of that continuity as well as increased funding. Another area that I guess kind of weaves into that is in continued community support. So when folks are released, are there resources available to prevent reincarceration? Another area that I find to decrease incarceration rates is closing the educational gap for folks. It's been proven that when folks have an opportunity to have a good paying job and engagement within the community, incarceration rates will drop also. So there we go. When we speak of reform as a whole, I guess I would just say, again, looking at where these fundings are, where the funding is going, and also looking at what services would be available and addressing the mental health needs of our community as a whole, but also the individuals that are incarcerated.
Okay. Lee, what are your thoughts? Lee, you're muted.
I have, like Rachel had kids coming in, I have a cat in the other room who's decided to make herself known right now. One of the things that I think is really important to look at is diversion courts. Outagamie County does a great work in their drug diversion courts. their veterans diversion courts. If there are ways that we can keep people from getting into the criminal justice system, I think we need to make some investments to make sure that that's happening. The governor has a lot of great things in his budget in terms of additional funding to programs that we already have. The Windows to Work program, a program that allows people to get the skills that they need and to get into the workforce after their release, to reduce that recidivism. Expanding all those avenues, opening avenues to recovery, reentry success is another program. Expanding earned release. It is expensive. It is expensive for the state to house and feed people. We spend more money in our criminal justice system than we do in our education system. And we need to find ways to get people out of that system or to prevent them from getting there in the first place. In terms of juvenile justice reform, I do support the closing of Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake. I do support the building of a new facility that would enable those youth offenders to be closer to their homes so that they can have the benefit of family visit and they are not so isolated as they work towards a better life. I think we can also do things in terms of compassionate release. We have people now who are infirm, who are sick, who are old, who are either close to the end of their sentence or really have done their time, so to speak, and we have an opportunity to have some compassionate release of individuals. And I think we can also take a look at, I don't think we should try juvenile offenders. I don't think we should try 17-year-olds as adults. And right now in Wisconsin, you can also sentence a juvenile to life in prison. And I think we know enough, about research about the brain. The prefrontal cortex is not fully formed yet. And a crime that you might commit at 16 should not mean that you spend the rest of your life behind bars. So I think there's a lot that we can do individually with bills and as a whole, and having these discussions. But I definitely think that Wisconsin is greatly in need of overwhelming criminal justice reform.
Okay, thank you. I think at this time, we'll skip ahead to slide 17 so that we can turn to some questions from the audience.
Are you passing up the marijuana question there, Linda?
Well,
now, this is one that I think we can also agree on, but I'll let you pass it. It's okay.
Well, I want to give some deference to our audience and what questions that they have. So I will, this time, Penny Bernard-Shaber and Cindy Filona have been monitoring questions. So we'll see what people have had to say. And Penny, if you're on, we'll start with a question from you for Rachael.
Sure. There is a question in the Q&A, and that is a question from Grant, who is a volunteer at the Community Action for Healthy Living. And he would like to know what the representatives plan to do. What action are they planning to take in stopping the youth epidemic with e-cigarettes? He would like to know what the future of his kids includes. Clean air and secondhand smoke from e-cigarettes is limited.
So again, repeat that to me. He's wondering what kind of legislation is going to address e-cigarettes. Is that what you're asking me, Penny?
Yes, especially for children or for minors.
Gotcha. So as a healthcare individual, this is definitely something that I've seen a rise in. Obviously, we know that there is an age restriction to purchasing of these, which unfortunately I see is not honored or respected by most folks in the community, because you see young kids with this all the time. I'm also very much discouraged by the fact that it is maybe say tailored or marketed or targeted to the younger demographics here in our state as well as in our country, simply with different flavors and so forth. As of this moment, I'm not familiar with any legislation within the state of Wisconsin that is going to address that, but it's definitely something that I would be open to exploring, simply because I do see the increased use of it significantly. As a healthcare provider, I mean, my role is to educate. I educate all the young kids that come into my clinic and explain the consequences of use of these products. So maybe I can impact on two levels. Number one, educating Number 2, maybe some legislation. And number 3, consequences for people that are providing this to individuals young individuals that shouldn't be accessing this.
Thank you, Lee. Do you have thoughts on this question?
No, I mean, my only thought is I'd love if he wants to send an email to my office, and to me, it sounds like an opportunity for Rachel and I to work together on something. We can get Ledge Reference Bureau investigating what laws have been passed in other states, or what's on the books in Wisconsin, and what we could improve to protect our young people from that.
Great, thank you. Cindy, do you have any questions that have come through the email?
Yes, I do. This question is from Alan, and he says, Wisconsin made national news in February when an out-of-state hunting organization pressured the DNR to authorize an unplanned wolf hunt. The resulting slaughter of 20% of the state's wolves in less than 3 days, significantly exceeding the quota, was an insult to many Wisconsinites and people around the country. How do we prevent a repeat of this in November?
Lee, well, let's start with you on this one.
You know, a friend of mine, Representative Christina Shelton, is on the, I think it's Sporting Heritage Committee. I don't know if you're on that committee, Rachel.
No, I'm not.
And I reached out to her a couple of times about this, and how can we prevent it in the future? Probably it's one of those unfortunate situations where seeing what has happened is going to make people more mindful of the consequences of something like that. You know, it's a difficult issue. I mean, I would love to see the wolves, you know, back on the endangered species list. You know, I mean, I don't want them to be endangered, but I'd like to see them back being in protected status. You know, but we do hear from, you know, farmers and others about their livestock being killed. And, you know, it's one of these issues where you sit in those committees and you kind of hear both sides. I don't agree with what happened. I think it's tragic. Yes, I'd like to avoid it. But I don't really have the answers other than, you know, we saw what happened, so let's make sure it doesn't happen again.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts on this, on the wolf hunt?
To be completely honest with you, I don't have a lot of background on the wolf hunt as a whole. I haven't spoken to anybody in particular about it, and I haven't been contacted by any constituents on it. If this is something that this individual is very passionate about, he's definitely welcome, if he's in my district, to reach out to me, and I can explore more and have an answer for you on that. But it's nothing that I have educated myself.
I mean, not to, Rep. Shelton will probably not be happy with me, but she is on the committee, and she took a vote on the issue. I would reach out to her office and, you know, get her position on it, share your concerns, and then as a committee member, because that's where a lot of this work happens, is in committee, and making sure that she understands your feelings about the consequences. You might be able to have a good conversation with her about it.
Could you repeat the name of that representative again?
Representative Christina Shelton. She's in the 90th, which is in the Green Bay area.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Penny, do you have a question?
I do. I have a question from Carol, and her question is, expanding Badger Care frees up lots of money that can be used for transportation, climate change projects, schools, etc. How can turning down Badger Care money from the federal government make smart financial sense?
Well, I don't think it does. And I'll give Rachel some time to respond. And, you know, I think pre-pandemic, Carol's right. A lot of that money could be spent in some of those areas, and it still can. But I also think that in the middle of the pandemic, and perhaps post-pandemic, you know, we've seen ways that frankly, some of that money is going to have to stay invested in healthcare. And one of the ways is improving the reimbursement rate for care providers. We have hospitals who we desperately need to stay open, who have really been dinged because people have canceled, you know, just normal procedures or routine procedures, and hospitals have lost quite a lot of income. So we need to make sure that we are making sure that they are getting the reimbursement rates, the Medicaid reimbursement rates up higher. Providers are you know, getting paid for the services that they're providing. So yes, we can still invest in some of those other things, but we also, I think we need to invest even more in healthcare, which maybe we didn't realize pre-pandemic. I don't think it makes financial sense at all. I think it's an ideological thing. And I think they just need to look at the red states around us and take the money. Other people are using the money that's supposed to be ours here in Wisconsin.
Rachel, do you have any other thoughts, different thoughts on this than you did before that you want to talk about?
Oh, bottom line, I'm not going to personally support expansion of a government program such as this. I think we can be creative in other ways to bring in other revenues. I know you skipped the medical marijuana question. That's something that we can agree on here, but I see other areas that we can bring in funding. It's not going to be reliance on more government programs. I just am not supportive of that. And through my clinic, I've proven that there are other ways that we can provide affordable health care. So no, I don't have anything else to add.
Well, maybe the medical marijuana question is germane to this issue. What are your thoughts about that?
In regards to bringing in revenues?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I campaigned on it, and I still support this idea of medical marijuana because I do see that there are ways and funding that can be brought in to supplement. So may this be one of the resources that can be utilized?
Okay.
Uh-oh, are you still there? My battery's saying 5%. I better get a backup.
Yeah. Lee, just curious about your thoughts about medical marijuana and also the funding source as far as recreational marijuana, since that was brought up.
Yeah, so I support both. I support medical marijuana for a number of reasons. Personally, I witnessed my father die in hospice, and I know that pain relief for him, comfort for him at the end that was not, a narcotic would have been welcome. I've talked to a number of veterans who suffer from PTSD and anxiety and who have, frankly, illegally been able to medicate themselves with cannabis and reduce their dependency on some really addictive and dangerous painkillers. So I really think it makes sense. In terms of, oh, there we go, Rachel.
Sorry.
Two of you. In terms of recreational, that term always is funny to me because I think recreational makes it seem like you're not taking it seriously and it's just sort of unregulated. But the point is to regulate it. The point is to legislate it so that you can regulate it, making sure that there are licensed, reputable dispensaries, making sure that you have age limits, making sure that you have, you're taxing it properly and that money is going to funding sources that matter, making sure that the research is funded and we have the ability to make it as safe as possible. Wisconsin is a huge binge drinking state. We're consistently making the top, drunkest cities, et cetera. That's not anything to be proud of. And I think part of the reason, frankly, is that people try to medicate their way using booze when, frankly, a little tincture or a little edible of marijuana used the right way would be a much healthier way of managing some of what people try to manage with alcohol in the state of Wisconsin.
Cindy, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. This question is from Cassie. Since 2005, firearms have killed more people in domestic violence homicides in Wisconsin than all other methods of killing combined. Between 2000 and 2019, firearms were used in over half of all domestic violence homicides in Wisconsin, and women are more than 5 times more likely to be killed if their abuser owns a firearm. Knowing all of this, do you support universal background checks for firearm purchases and the inclusion of extreme risk projection injunction procedures and the state budget, which would help protect victims of domestic violence?
Lee, let's start with you on this one.
I do support these measures. I also support everybody's right to be a responsible owner of a firearm. So I want to make that clear. Oftentimes when people talk to Democrats, they think I'm trying to take away their guns. I'm not trying to take away your guns. And the gun owners that I know support these measures as well. I think owning a gun, while it might be a constitutional right, comes with responsibility. And some of that responsibility is making sure you're trained to own it, making sure that you have background checks no matter how you purchased it. If you purchase it through private sale, there should not be any loopholes. And I also think, like most law enforcement officers that if you talk to around the state and around the country, they support Extreme Risk Protection Act legislation. It's not interfering with somebody's due process, and it would save lives. They have responded to too many suicides, too many homicides, and they know that there are signs when somebody is having a mental health break, when somebody is at their limit, when somebody is exhibiting signs, behaviors, et cetera, that could potentially put themselves at risk or their family at risk. If they are a gun owner, there should be the ability through a process for them to temporarily have that firearm removed. And I do believe that these things would save lives. I think these are small things that we can do. What, in the last 2 weeks, we've had, 3 mass shootings? We have to do something. The time is I'm tired of thoughts and prayers. It's time for legislation and action.
Thank you. Rachel?
Can you read it again? That was quite a long question.
Yes, Rachel, let me summarize it. Basically, it's she's asking, do you support universal background checks for firearm purchases? And do you support the inclusion of extreme risk projection injunction procedures in the state budget, which would help protect victims of domestic violence?
So when it comes to background checks, universal background checks, I do believe that there is some background check that is already in place. If I'm correct, I'm not well versed on all the background checks when it comes to firearms. In regards to, well, actually, there's a bill out there that I'd like to actually talk about in regards to firearms and safety. And I don't know if, I'm not sure, Lee, if you signed on to this one or not, but this is out there by Representative Jesse James. And what this bill is it's grant money that goes to the police departments, as well as, if I'm correct, gun shops, areas where you can purchase guns, that will allow them to hold weapons if there are any concerns with safety. So if you have a family member that is high risk or struggling, or domestic abuse into play, you're able to bring your weapons and have them safely managed to prevent maybe incidents that Lee spoke of, and incidents that have occurred across the country here. So that is one thing that we're at least doing here in the state of Wisconsin, that is on the docket in Madison currently. Not sure if I answered that second question as well as the gal would like, but I'm not familiar with the lingo that she speaks of.
I'm aware of the bill. I haven't signed on as a co-sponsor. Representative Deb Andraka, who's my office mate and who campaigned on a safer Wisconsin in terms of gun violence prevention. And I have had some discussions about it. I think it's one of those bills where it does a little bit of what we'd like to see, but quote, not enough. If it comes to the floor, I'm sure it's something I'll vote for. Whether or not I'll sign on as a co-sponsor, I haven't decided yet.
Thank you. Penny, do you have any other questions that come forward?
I do. I have a question from Tony, and his question is this. In county and municipal offices have voiced concerns about the excessive splitting of their boundaries with the 2011 redistricting. 2021 redistricting coming up. Is there a plan to try and keep intact the boundaries of counties and municipalities, keep them as intact as possible?
Rachel, do you want to start on this one?
I'm not familiar with the details that go into the redistricting of this. I don't know. Lee, are you familiar with all the details that go into this?
I mean, no, I mean, so an argument would be using geographical boundaries that make sense. Like, don't, like, I'm on the Fox River, like, don't cut, back and forth over the Fox River, or,
Right.
like right now I have Outagamie and Winnebago County in my district. Conceivably it could be drawn that I could have Calumet County in my district as well, depending on how the maps go. In fact, I was over at somebody's bike shop the other day, and I said something about, oh, you're in my district. And he said, no, actually that's 2 blocks over. And it didn't make any sense. Like Calumet County, or excuse me, Calumet Road would have been a good, a logical geographical boundary. So Rachel and I don't know who's drawing them, how they're being drawn, et cetera. I would say, let's not needlessly chop things up in a way that doesn't make sense just to try to grab a few Democratic houses or a few Republican houses. I don't like to see things like that. Am I going to gain some of North Appleton? Am I going to gain some of Southern Appleton in the redistricting process? Remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I think there's another part of this question that it goes to the fact that the state went first last time and ignored the boundaries that were drawn within the municipalities, so that some of the municipal districts were divided into more than one state legislative district. So would you support the state going after and standing with the county and municipal ward districts?
I would. I think it makes sense. It would be less messy. It's often really difficult when the city council districts and the county board supervisor districts make absolutely no sense in how they fit into a state legislative district.
Okay. Cindy, do you have any more questions?
Yes, I do. I have one.
I just want you guys to know that my cat has joined the town hall. And yes,
Okay.
I'm showing her to you.
Cindy, I'm looking for a question on healthcare or mental health. Give me one of those.
Oh, I don't have one, but I do have a question from Tony on, does the legislature plan to close the dark store loophole in 2021?
Ask Roger Roth.
I'll take whatever. I'll take the opposite of whatever Lee's going to say on this one. This is Lee's passion.
I wish they would. I wish it was my train I was driving on this, but I'm afraid I'm not the conductor. Senator Roth is.
That was legislation that he wrote, was it not?
He wrote it and then he killed it on the floor. And then he said he'd pass it again. And maybe he will. Hope springs eternal.
Cindy, do you have any more questions on your list?
I do have one from Nancy, and she says, do you support the governor's budget for the UW system? Do you believe it is adequate considering the major cuts that have occurred during the past decade and the importance on the UW system to an educated citizenry and future state economic growth? So the question is, do you support the governor's budget for the UW system, and do you believe it's adequate?
Rachel, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah. So I worked for the UW system, right? I did for 13 years. I do support the UW system. When I look at the budget, which was, I think, like 1,800 pages. I don't know how many pages you got through with that, Lee, there, but
I read the summary. I didn't read the budget, the huge real budget. I read the budget summary.
Right. I did see some things within the UW system that I was supportive of. I know that I have spoken with my budget buddy as a whole in regards to increased funding to nursing programs and instructional staff that will support the increased need for nurses. I also, kind of deviating a little bit from the UW system, have also been a big advocate for a program through the tech colleges that they're seeking a $12 million fundage for one-year programs, which will allow quicker outcomes and quicker turnaround for students that are enrolled in programs such as welding or CDL programs, CNA programs. I see that there is definitely benefit within the UW system, but there's also definitely benefit within the technical colleges. And so do I support everything in regards to what was proposed to the UW system? I would say not, but much of it I could support, having worked there, seeing the benefits of UW throughout our state of Wisconsin, the employment that's associated with it, and also the research that's coming out of it. But to give you an exact number, I wouldn't be able to provide that to you at this moment. But in particular, staffing, in particular, looking at salaries associated with that, and then also within the world of nursing, making sure that that's funded, and then the tech colleges for that $12 million for the one-year programs. That's what I have supported at this point.
Okay, thank you. Lee?
I'm not going to give as much of a detailed answer on that. I guess I'll say that I was disappointed that the entirety of the governor's capital projects were rejected already. A number of those were related to investments in buildings in the UW system. And a lot of times people say, well, we don't need buildings. Well, actually, you kind of do. You need those buildings to house the programs and to draw people into those programs and to provide that lab space, that music space, that, whatever it is. UW Oshkosh actually had a capital project that got axed. And I think that's unfortunate. So in terms of investing in the UW system as a whole, I'm a product of the UW system. I have a child right now who's a sophomore in the UW system. Obviously, I support it. And I support an investment in funding so that we can help reduce student and family costs to attend that university. So, and I'm not just saying that because I'm paying for it, because frankly, I'm not. My son is as a merit recipient because he's a talented jazz percussionist. So, but I do think we need to make our schools more affordable. And part of the way is making a state investment in the UW system that's broader. So that we can not necessarily have higher tuition or higher fees, but that's something that the state back funds. So yeah, do I think it's enough? It's probably not enough. I think it was Nancy who asked the question. Do I think that we're going to get everything that the governor asked for? Certainly not, given the environment that we're in. Do I think that we'll get a little bit more? I certainly hope so. And to Rachel's point, I agree. We often think that education in Wisconsin is a 4-year institution. There's many paths to being educated and expanding your knowledge and expanding your vision. And some of those are at UW schools and a 4-year college, and some of those are at technical colleges and universities.
I would like to comment on the capital response that you had in regards to the building growth or, continued growth or development and remodeling. That's been a hard one for me, simply because of this COVID bit. I'm sitting here and saying more buildings, more buildings, more buildings. How do we justify that when our students haven't been in for the last year? I think that COVID has really transformed the way people are looking at education and wanting education to be obtained. And I think that there will be a reduction in classroom participation, which I think is a shame. I personally think that there's a lot lost when we're, doing things via Zoom or, via, what we're doing here. But I see a reduction in need in physical space in the future. I'm not saying it's all going to disappear, but the growth and expansion that was asked in that budget, I think was excessive, particularly since these buildings have not really been utilized in the last year.
And I would say, as a mom of a student in the humanities building, when he's playing drums and a large piece of rusty plaster fell down on his head, that yes, we definitely need to make an investment in.
I have kids in the UW system too, and I've seen great things. And I taught at University of Wisconsin Oshkosh for 13 years.
Go to the humanities building in Madison and tell me what you think.
Well, maybe we need to renovate it, put a little bit of money in there, but a whole nother building, it's a hard one for me.
They're not, I don't think that they were asking, well, maybe they were. But yeah, humanities building is quite bad.
Mm. Well, I think at this time, we should wrap up our discussion, but I want to thank you both for your time this evening and for the lively and substantive discussion that we've had. A recording of this webinar will be available on the League of Women Voters website. And if we could go to the next slide, I want to remind everyone that contacting your elected representatives to express your views and opinions is a vital part of the democratic process. The Wisconsin legislature's website provides you with all the information that you need to contact your state representative. So if all the questions that you had in mind or something that you submitted didn't get asked tonight, by all means, make it known and contact them. Tonight, we have focused on Senate District 19, which includes Assembly Districts 55, 56, and 57. We would like to repeat this event in the future and hope that all 4 of our Fox Cities legislators will be able to participate the next time. We also plan to hold another virtual town hall with Senator Robert Cowles from Senate District 2 and Representatives Dave Steffen from Assembly District 4, Jim Steinecke from Assembly District 5, and Gary Talkin from Assembly District 6. So I'd once again like to thank both Lee and Rachel for sharing your views with us this evening and for your service and dedication to our state. And thanks to all of you in our audience who have taken the time to listen and submit questions. We hope you will join us for future town halls and other future League of Women Voters events that I'd like to highlight briefly. On Monday, April 18th, we will have a program on the structure of our local league from 5:15 to 6:30, and our annual meeting will take place on May 15th from 9 to 11 a.m. And there's one more exciting event that I'd like to also highlight on the next slide. The League of Women Voters of the United States has dedicated April 9th or April 29th as People-Powered Day of Action, and they're focusing on one of their highest priorities, which is redistricting. And we have arranged to host a screening of the documentary film, Can You Hear Us Now? This is a very compelling 90-minute film that tells the story of the 2018 midterm elections in Wisconsin and how gerrymandering has affected our state government. Following the film, there'll be a live panel discussion, which will include the film's 2 producers. So mark your calendars, you won't want to miss this event, and tell your friends and neighbors. Again, thanks to our 2 legislators and to all of you for joining us this evening, and good night.
Linda, can I make a comment really quick?
Sure.
My email is wrong.
Good.
My staff just contacted me that. So if you do want to get in contact in my office, Ryan or myself always get back to people via phone call or email. But if they're going to contact the email that you have listed there, they are not going to get a response from me. So it's really important that they, Google my Madison email so that it doesn't look as if I'm not responsive.
Okay, well, thank you for calling that to our attention. That was on the legislative website, so I'm not sure.
Well, we'll just double check it, but staff just emailed me and said, make sure to, or text me, said, make sure to let you know that it is not correct. And thank you for the opportunity for coming and allowing us to discuss in a civil manner here. I appreciate that. And make sure you look for Lee and I with our listening session coming up here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Everybody. Good night, Rachel.
Bye.
Good night.